Her mother looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Nia has your father's cheekbones. You got the rest." Zuri Bennett was 11 years old. She laughed it off the way she'd learned to laugh everything off. Quick, quiet, eyes dropping to the floor before anyone could see what the words actually did. Her mother wasn't being cruel. That was the worst part. She was just being honest, the way she was always honest. The way a woman who'd survived hard things sometimes forgets that honesty without tenderness is just cruelty wearing a sensible coat. 28 years old now, and Zuri still remembered the exact color of the kitchen wall when those words landed. Pale yellow, chipped near the window. Some things you don't forget. You just learn to carry them quieter. If you've ever been the one in the room that nobody picks, the one who works twice as hard and still finishes last, stay with me. Because this story is about what happens when a woman who has spent her entire life being overlooked walks into a room and makes the most dangerous man in it forget his own name. Like this video if you believe every woman deserves to be chosen. Drop your city and country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what comes next. Now let's begin. The storm came in fast. Charlotte didn't ease into bad weather. It committed. 1 hour the sky was the color of old pewter, low and pressed down against the skyline like a thumb on a bruise. And the next, rain was hammering the streets in sheets so thick you could barely see the parking lot lights from the hotel lobby doors. The thunder didn't rumble. It cracked, sharp and close, the kind that made people flinch even if they'd lived through 100 Carolina storms. Zuri was behind the front desk when the power hiccuped. Not a full outage, just a flicker. 3 seconds of the lobby going almost dark before the emergency systems caught it. But 3 seconds was enough. The reservation software froze mid-screen. The printer went offline. The phone line to the back office started cycling through a busy signal that didn't make any sense because nobody was using it. She didn't panic. Panic was a luxury she stopped being able to afford around the time she turned 22 and realized the financial hole her parents were in was deeper than anybody had admitted. She pulled out the laminated manual that nobody else on staff bothered to read, found the protocol for system crashes during peak check-in, and started doing it by hand. Paper records. Carbon copies. The way the older manager had taught her back when she first started, and he'd said, half joking, "Systems will fail you, Zuri. People will definitely fail you. Paper just sits there and takes it." She'd thought that was cynical at the time. Now she thought it was the most accurate thing anyone had ever said to her. The lobby was half full. A couple near the elevators arguing in low, tight voices about whether they'd packed the right outlet adapter. A businessman in a rain-soaked suit standing at the far end of the counter, looking like he regretted every decision that had led him to Charlotte in December. 2 teenagers on their phones by the vending machines, completely unconcerned with everything happening around them in the way only teenagers could manage. She was manually cross-referencing room assignments when the lobby doors opened and the sound of the rain doubled for a moment, and then she heard a voice. "And I'm just saying, if you hadn't insisted on the scenic route, there is no scenic route in a storm, Do-hyun. There's always a scenic route. That's the whole point of scenic routes. They exist regardless of conditions. Stop talking." The second voice was quiet, not aggressive, not particularly cold. Just the voice of a man who was used to people actually doing what he said, which somehow made it more effective than shouting would have been. The first voice stopped mid-syllable. Zuri looked up. 2 men. The taller one was carrying both their bags, which struck her immediately as odd, given that he was clearly the one in charge. He moved like it, stood like it, that particular stillness that some people had that made the space around them feel reorganized by their presence. He was wearing a charcoal coat that had gotten wet at the shoulders and cuffs, dark slacks, no tie, somewhere between 35 and 40. Korean, she thought, though she wasn't certain, and it wasn't the most pressing observation she was making. The pressing observation she was making was the expression on his face when he clocked the lobby situation. The flickering courtesy lights, the fact that the check-in kiosks were dark, the staff member, her, just her, because Marcus had called out sick and the night manager was stuck on the other side of town, doing everything manually. And rather than sighing or pulling out his phone to complain, he simply stood there and waited. just waited. The other man, shorter, younger, a face that looked like it had never fully committed to seriousness, turned to the tall one and said, in a voice that was absolutely not as quiet as he seemed to think it was, "The system's down. You want me to call?" "No." "I was just going to say, I know what you were going to say." "Then why?" "Because we're going to stand here and let the woman do her job." Zuri heard all of it. She'd learned to hear everything behind a hotel desk without reacting to any of it. It was a specific skill, like being able to read upside down or remember a face from 6 months ago. She kept her eyes on the paper in front of her and finished the notation she was on, then looked up with the expression she'd calibrated over years of night shifts. Professional, unhurried, the particular warmth that wasn't fake but also wasn't personal. "Good evening," she said. "I apologize for the wait and for the system issues. We're checking guests in manually tonight. Can I get your name?" The taller man stepped forward. Up close, he was... She clocked this fast and filed it away the same way she filed most things, striking in a way that had less to do with conventional handsomeness and more to do with the precision of him. Everything deliberate. Nothing wasted. "Kang," he said. "Min-jae Kang. 2 rooms." She found the reservation in the paper backup. Found it fast because she'd reorganized the stack by last name 10 minutes ago when she'd realized the crash wasn't going to resolve itself quickly. "Mr. Kang," she ran her finger down the confirmation. "I have you in a standard king on the 14th floor." She paused. The system was down, which meant she couldn't see current occupancy in real time, but she knew this hotel's booking patterns the way she knew the back of her own hand from staring at it during slow nights. The 14th floor had been running at about 60% this week. The 16th floor executive suite had been blocked for a conference group that had canceled this afternoon. She'd processed the cancellation herself at the start of her shift. The standard king was fine. It was what he'd booked. But the suite was sitting empty, and given the state of the lobby and the fact that she'd already made 3 separate people wait longer than they should have tonight, she made a decision. "Actually, she said, I'd like to move you to the executive suite on 16, same rate as your reservation. We've had a cancellation and it doesn't make sense to leave it empty." She said it simply, without making a production of it, because making a production of upgrades always felt false to her, like trying to get credit for basic decency. The shorter man, Do-hyun, she'd gathered, lit up. "Oh, we're absolutely taking that." Kang Min-jae was looking at her. Not the way men sometimes looked at her behind a front desk, assessing, dismissive, or worse, the particular look that meant they were about to try something, but with what she could only describe as attention. Like she'd said something that required careful consideration. "You processed the cancellation yourself," he said. It wasn't a question. "About 3 hours ago," she said. "I logged the time in case housekeeping needs to know when they can turn it over." "And you reorganized the paper records by name when the system went down." She glanced at the stack, then back at him. "It seemed faster." He nodded once. Slow, like something had been confirmed that he'd already suspected. "We'll take the suite," he said. She finished the check-in, printed his key cards using the manual imprinter, another piece of equipment nobody else touched, and explained the situation with the elevators. One was running slow, maintenance had been notified. She recommended the one on the north side of the building. She answered Do-hyun's questions about room service hours, and whether the hotel had umbrellas for guest use, and whether the storm was supposed to clear by morning with the same calm she brought to everything. Throughout all of it, Kang Min-jae stood slightly to the side and did not say another word. He just watched her. When she handed him the key cards, their hands didn't touch. She made sure of it. She always made sure of it, a habit born of years of knowing that some men read contact into everything, but he noticed anyway. She could tell he noticed because his eyes moved from her hands to her face with that same quality of careful attention. "Thank you," he said. "Of course. Have a good evening, Mr. Kang." They walked toward the elevator bank. She heard Do-hyun start up again. Something about the ice machine, whether there was one on 16, and Kang Min-jae's voice, quieter than the lobby noise, saying something she couldn't quite catch. She went back to her paper stack. There were 4 more guests waiting. She didn't think about the man in the charcoal coat again for the rest of the shift. She was very good at not thinking about things. What she was less good at, had never been good at, if she was honest with herself in the 3 in the morning quiet of her own apartment, was pretending she didn't know exactly what she looked like, not in a self-pitying way. Zuri had moved past self-pity somewhere around 23 when she'd realized it was expensive and didn't pay any of the bills. She knew what she looked like the way she knew the square footage of her apartment and the exact interest rate on her parents' second mortgage, clearly, precisely, without the luxury of softening the numbers. She was a big woman, had been since she was 14 when her body had done what her mother called coming into itself, in a tone that made it sound like an inconvenience. Wide hips, full arms, a stomach that refused to flatten no matter how many months she spent being careful about what she ate. Dark brown skin, the deep kind that her mother sometimes called difficult, in the way she called things difficult when she meant something else. Hair she kept natural because relaxing it cost money she didn't have, and honestly hadn't had since college, the semester she'd dropped out to come home and help. Her mother called her sturdy. Meant it as a compliment, she thought. The way you'd call a table sturdy. Her sister Nia was not sturdy. Nia was what their mother called put together, which covered everything from her smaller frame to her lighter complexion to the particular way she walked into a room and made everyone in it take brief inventory of their own inadequacies. Nia was 24 and already had a job with benefits and a boyfriend who brought their parents flowers, and their mother talked about her the way people talked about something they were proud to own. Zuri paid their parents' electric bill, had been paying it for 4 years. Also the water bill, and part of the mortgage when things got tight, which was often enough that she'd stopped tracking when things were tight and when they weren't because the distinction had become meaningless. She worked the hotel desk from 11 at night to 7 in the morning, 4 nights a week. The other 3 days she worked the counter at a dry cleaning shop on Providence Road, 8 to 4, because the hotel alone wasn't enough and the dry cleaning alone wasn't enough. But together they were almost enough, and almost was what she had. She slept when she could, ate when she remembered, called her mother every Sunday, listened to updates about Nia's life and her father's blood pressure and the neighbor's new car and said, and that's good, and I'll see what I can do, until she could get off the phone. Monica thought she was crazy. Monica Ellis lived next door and had opinions about everything, stated them at full volume, and had been Zuri's closest friend since they'd both reached for the last box of the same pasta at the grocery store, and Monica had said, without hesitation, "I had it first, but you look like you need it more," and then bought 2 boxes and given Zuri 1. That was the kind of person Monica was, loudly generous, aggressively perceptive. You're going to work yourself into an early grave carrying people who are perfectly capable of carrying themselves, Monica told her at least once a month. They're my family, Zuri always said. So? Families can be wrong about what they deserve. Zuri didn't have an answer for that. She just refilled Monica's coffee and changed the subject, which was another thing she was very good at. Bam. She didn't expect to see Kong Min-jae again. Guests checked in, guests checked out, and the ones that made an impression on her during a particularly complicated night usually looked at her like a stranger when they passed through the lobby again. She'd long since stopped being surprised by that. She was a function more than a face, most of the time. The one who solved the problem. The one who remembered the details. Not quite visible in the way that mattered. He came back the next evening. Not to check in. He was already checked in, but at the desk. 11:40, which was 40 minutes into her shift, and the lobby was quiet, and the system had recovered and everything was running the way it was supposed to run, the way it never did when she needed it to. He wasn't wearing the coat this time. Dark sweater, dark pants, the same quality of stillness. Do-hyun was not with him. He stopped at the desk and she looked up. "Mr. Kang," she said, "is everything all right with the room?" "The room is fine." She waited. He put both hands on the counter, not leaning, just grounded, like he was deciding something and didn't want to rush it. She'd seen executives do this, the particular performance of deliberation, but on him it didn't read like performance. It read like he actually was deciding something. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I'd like you to hear it before you answer." She kept her expression neutral. "Okay?" I have an event this Saturday. A wedding. Former associate's daughter. He said this like it was information, nothing more. No warmth, no framing. I need to bring someone. Zuri looked at him for a moment. Okay, she said again, slower. I'm not asking you to be something you're not. No pretense. One evening, you would be my guest. He paused. The compensation would be substantial. Something in her chest did something complicated. Not offense exactly. More like recognition. The particular feeling of being evaluated in a context where you hadn't agreed to be evaluated. You're asking me to be your date, she said carefully. I'm asking you to attend an event with me. The distinction matters. She thought about that. Why me? He didn't hesitate. Because you're the first person I've met in Charlotte who solved 3 problems simultaneously without being asked to, without complaining, and without making me feel obligated to express gratitude at every step. He held her gaze. I don't want to spend an evening managing someone's expectations. I want someone who walks into a room and handles it. It was the strangest thing anyone had ever said to her. It was also, she would realize later, probably the most accurate thing anyone had ever said about her. She thought about the electric bill due on the 15th. She thought about her father's prescription copays that they'd been quietly rationing. She thought about Monica, who would absolutely lose her mind when she heard this. How substantial, she said. He named a number. Her face didn't move. She'd gotten very good at that. But her hands, below the counter where he couldn't see them, gripped the edge of the desk and held on. That number was 3 months of bills. All of them. Everything her parents owed that she'd been covering in pieces and installments and compromises that kept her awake at 4 in the morning, running math in her head like a machine that couldn't shut itself off. She looked at him for a long time. He looked back. Didn't fill the silence with reassurance or pressure, just waited. The same way he'd waited the night of the storm. I'll need the event details in writing, she said, and I'd like to review what's expected. Of course. And I want to know your terms before I agree to anything. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, more like acknowledgement. Name yours first, he said. She hadn't expected that. Neither, it seemed, had he. Expected her to square her shoulders, look him directly in the eye across the hotel desk at 11:43 on a Tuesday, and start talking. But she did. And the whole time she spoke calm, precise, no wasted words. The most dangerous man she had never heard of stood on the other side of the counter and paid very close attention. Do-hyun found out about the agreement at 7 in the morning, standing in the suite's kitchen in his socks, eating cold room service noodles directly from the container, and his reaction was immediate and entirely typical. You asked a stranger to come to Jisoo's wedding. Min-jae was at the window with his phone, not looking at him. She's not a stranger. You met her 48 hours ago. I know when I met her. You met her when she checked you into a hotel during a power outage, and you were apparently so moved by her alphabetized paper files that you decided she should attend the most politically volatile event on your calendar this month. Do-hyun set the noodle container down on the counter with a sound that was almost but not quite aggressive. I'm not judging. I'm just making sure I have the facts correct. You have them correct. And she said yes. She negotiated terms and then said yes. There's a difference. Do-hyun was quiet for 3 full seconds, which for him was extraordinary. Then, I like her. Min-jae didn't respond. I'm going with you when you give her the details. You're not. Min-jae. You are going to walk into that hotel lobby in the middle of her shift, hand a woman a document that outlines the terms of her attendance at a Korean crime family's social event, and you think that goes better without a human being present to buffer the experience? Min-jae turned from the window. He looked at his cousin the way he looked at most things, measuring, unhurried, not unkind, but not soft either. She doesn't know what we are. I'm aware. And she's not going to know, not this week. Also aware. Do-hyun picked up the noodle container again. I'm still going. Us. Zuri told Monica at 6 in the morning, still in her work clothes, sitting on Monica's couch because Monica had heard her key in the lock next door and opened her own door before Zuri even reached it, because Monica had radar for things Zuri was carrying and couldn't put down. She told her the amount. Monica's face went through 4 separate expressions in under 2 seconds, which Zuri had learned to read like a weather system: surprise, calculation, suspicion, and then the particular look that meant she was about to say something Zuri might not want to hear, but needed to anyway. One night, at a wedding, with a man you checked into a hotel room during a thunderstorm. He booked 2 rooms, and yes, Monica sat back. She was 41 and built like someone who had once been told she was too much and had decided to take that as instruction rather than criticism. She pulled her robe tighter and looked at Zuri the way she always looked at Zuri when Zuri was about to do something Monica thought was simultaneously brave and potentially catastrophic. "What do you know about him?" she said. "He's Korean. Here on business. Polite." Zuri thought about it. Very still. Very still. Like he doesn't move unless he means to. Monica chewed on that. Rich? The rate he paid for the suite without blinking was... Zuri stopped. Yes, significantly. Security? Staff? Zuri hesitated. His cousin. One person. That I saw. Monica looked at her for a long time. Then she got up, went to the kitchen, came back with 2 mugs of coffee that she'd apparently already had waiting, which meant she'd been up, which meant she'd heard Zuri come in and had started the coffee before the knock, which was the kind of thing Monica did that Zuri tried not to think about too hard because it made her chest hurt in a way she didn't have language for. "You're going to do it," Monica said. "Not a question. The money would cover. I know what the money would cover. I've been watching you do math in your head every time your mother calls for 3 years. Monica wrapped both hands around her mug. "I'm not telling you not to go. I'm telling you to go in with your eyes open." "They're open." Zuri. "They're open, Monica." Monica looked at her. Zuri looked back. The coffee was too hot, but she drank it anyway. The familiar burn of doing things before they were ready. And Monica finally made a sound that wasn't agreement, but wasn't objection either. Just acknowledgement. The sound of a person who knows the decision is already made and is recalibrating her concern accordingly. "You're calling me the minute it's done," Monica said. "The minute it's done. And if anything feels wrong, I'll leave." Without apologizing. Zuri almost smiled. Without apologizing. The document Minjae sent to her email was 1 page. Zuri had expected it to be complicated, full of language designed to be technically clear but practically obscure, the way powerful people's paperwork usually was. Instead, it was almost bare. The event, the date, the time, the location. The nature of the occasion. A private wedding ceremony and reception, approximately 200 guests. His name, her name, the role. Invited guest. The compensation, broken into 2 halves, the first deposited within 24 hours of her agreement, the second within 48 hours of the event's conclusion. A single clause at the bottom that said, in plain language, no physical contact beyond what is appropriate in a social setting, no expectation of continued relationship or obligation, all personal information shared during the event remains confidential. She read it twice. Then a 3rd time looking for what wasn't there. There was no clause asking her to pretend to be anything specific. No requirement that she act as a girlfriend, a fiancée, a business partner. No instructions about what to say or not say. Nothing about her appearance. She called the number at the bottom of the email. He picked up on the 2nd ring. "I have a question about the confidentiality clause," she said. "Ask it." "It says personal information remains confidential." Whose personal information? Both parties. So if someone at the event asks who I am, you tell them whatever you're comfortable telling them. She absorbed that. "You don't want me to perform a specific role." "I want you to be present," he said. "What you do with that is your own." She looked at the document again. "The guests. Will any of them know me?" "No." "Will they speak English?" "Most of them. The ones who don't will have people with them who do." "Is there anything I should know about the other guests, professionally?" She chose the word carefully. There was a pause. Not long, half a beat, the space between a thought, and the decision to share it. Some of them are influential, he said, in ways that aren't entirely public. She let that sit. Okay. Is that a problem? Not yet, she said. I'll let you know if it becomes one. Another pause. This one felt different, less like calculation and more like something she didn't have a clean word for. There's one more thing, he said. Okay? The woman getting married, Han Sua. We were engaged briefly several years ago. It ended without conflict, but some of the guests may be aware of that history, and some of them may react to your presence with that knowledge in mind. Zuri closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. You're telling me I'm going to be walked into a room full of people who are going to look at me like I'm a statement? Yes. And some of them will not approve of the statement. Some of them, yes. She opened her eyes. Outside her window, the morning was gray and thin, the kind of winter light that felt like an apology. She thought about her mother's voice. She thought about the number in the document. She thought about Evan Brooks's laugh, short, uncomfortable, the laugh of a man trying to kindly explain that she'd misread everything. Fine, she said. Fine? I said fine. Send the first half to the account number, I'll text you. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, you'll need something to wear. I'll handle that. My cousin would like to... I'll handle it. He's very enthusiastic about Mr. Kang. Yes, I'll handle it. A pause. And then quiet, almost to himself. Of course you will. Do-hyun did not accept this outcome. He showed up at the hotel Thursday afternoon, not during her shift because she wasn't working, but he'd apparently asked the front desk to pass along a note, which she found in her work mailbox Friday morning, a phone number, and the words, I have opinions about fabric. Your call. DH. She didn't call. He texted her instead because apparently the note had included her work contact, which was, she thought with some irritation, a breach of about 3 different protocols she was going to have to speak to the desk manager about. The text said, There's a boutique on Tryon that has an emerald silk that would be very rude to everyone in the room. Thought you should know. Do-hyun Kang. The cousin, the good-looking one, the one who thinks about these things. She stared at the text for a moment. Then she thought about what she had in her closet, which was a black dress she'd worn to 2 funerals and a work retirement party, a navy wrap that her mother had given her, and that was 2 sizes too small across the shoulders, and a deep burgundy skirt that she hadn't worn in 2 years because the last time she'd worn it, a man had told her it was a lot. She texted back, which boutique? Do-hyun arrived at the boutique before her and was already in conversation with the store manager when she walked in, a level of social ease that she found both impressive and slightly suspicious, in the way that all effortless charm was slightly suspicious when you'd grown up around people who worked hard at everything. He turned when he heard the door and looked at her with the frank assessment of someone who was thinking about silhouettes and colors rather than cataloging flaws, which she noticed, which was not something she normally noticed, which told her something about what she'd gotten used to. You didn't want help, he said. I don't need help. Those are different statements and you know it. He gestured at the rack behind him. I've already pulled 4 options. You can ignore all of them and choose something else. I just ask that you consider the emerald before you dismiss it. She looked at him for a moment. He had Min-jae's bone structure without Min-jae's weight, lighter somehow, easier, like the same material had been made into something designed for different conditions. She wondered what it was like to move through the world with that much ambient warmth, and whether he'd been born with it or built it as a survival strategy. Why are you doing this? She asked. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. Because my cousin has very good instincts about most things, and virtually no instincts about the things that matter most. And because you're about to walk into a room full of people who've spent their whole lives deciding who belongs and who doesn't. And I want you to walk in wearing something that makes that question feel stupid. She looked at him for a long time. Show me the emerald, she said. Damat. Saturday came in cold and clear, the storm long gone, the sky the particular hard blue of December mornings that wanted you to know they were not interested in being beautiful for your comfort. Zuri spent 40 minutes on her hair, which was longer than she usually spent on anything related to her appearance, and then spent another 15 telling herself that wasn't meaningful. Monica came over while she was getting ready and sat on the edge of the bed and said nothing, which for Monica meant everything. "How do I look?" Zuri asked. Monica looked at her for a long moment. The emerald dress was what Do Hyun had called, during the fitting, aggressively honest, by which he meant it did not apologize for the body inside it. Floor length fitted through the waist and hips, with a neckline that was elegant rather than dramatic. It was the most expensive thing Zuri had ever worn by a margin that made her feel slightly outside herself, like she was test driving someone else's life. "You look," Monica said, and stopped. "Monica, you look like yourself," Monica said. "But like the version of yourself that you are when nobody who doesn't deserve to see it is watching." Zuri turned back to the mirror. She wasn't sure what expression she made. Something settled, maybe? Something that wasn't quite peace, but was adjacent to it. "Don't let them make you small," Monica said. "I'm not small." "No," Monica said. "You're not. Don't forget." Min-jae was waiting in the hotel lobby when the car brought her, and she watched him through the lobby window for a moment before going in because she wanted to see what he looked like when he didn't know he was being observed. He looked like a man doing math, standing near the seating area, hands in his coat pockets, not on his phone, not talking to anyone, just running something in his head. His expression was the closest thing to open she'd seen on him, which was still extremely closed by any other measure, but there was a tension in the line of his shoulders that the stillness usually concealed. She pushed through the lobby door. He turned before she'd taken 3 steps, which told her his situational awareness was the kind that didn't require looking in the right direction to know something had changed in the room. He looked at her. She let him look. She'd decided, getting into the car, that she was done managing other people's reactions to her appearance, as though their discomfort was her responsibility to resolve. If he was going to register surprise or adjustment, or whatever it was men registered when reality didn't match expectation, she was going to stand there and let it happen without tilting herself to make it easier. He didn't register surprise. What crossed his face was something quieter and more specific than that, something she catalogued and then deliberately did not examine further because she had enough to manage tonight. "You look," he started. "Ready," she said. "Let's go." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. She was starting to think that might be as close as he got. The venue was 40 minutes outside Charlotte, a private estate that someone had lit with the kind of careful excess that communicated wealth without the vulgarity of announcing it. Long gravel drive lined with lanterns. Stone facade, dark ivy, the kind of building that had been built to outlast everyone inside it. There were cars she didn't recognize, and a few she did in the way that you recognize things from photographs and articles you'd scrolled past without meaning to. Someone's security detail standing near the east entrance trying to look like guests, and failing. A cluster of women near the front steps in gowns that cost more than her parents' mortgage, speaking rapidly in Korean, who paused their conversation when the car stopped. She felt it. The pause. The recalibration. Min-jae opened the car door before the driver could, which surprised her, and she stepped out onto the gravel and the cold hit her across the shoulders, and she breathed through it. "They're going to stare," he said quietly, beside her. Not asking, not apologizing, just naming it. "I know. You can ignore it. I know." Or, he said, "you can look directly back at them. Either approach is acceptable." She glanced at him. "Which do you prefer?" He considered that with the seriousness of a man who had opinions about everything but had learned the cost of volunteering them uninvited. "Whichever one you prefer," he said. "I'll match." She looked at the women near the steps, who were still watching. She squared her shoulders. Not a performance, just the unconscious correction of someone who'd spent decades caving inward and was tired of it. "Let's go in," she said. The ballroom was enormous and full and loud with the specific noise of people who were performing being comfortable, which sounded different from actual comfort in the same way that expensive perfume smelled different from things that were simply clean. Round tables, candlelight, a string quartet in the far corner that nobody was listening to. Zuri walked in beside Min-jae, and the noise didn't stop. Nothing that dramatic. but she felt the current of attention move through the room the way a draft moved through a closed space. Invisible but undeniable, touching everything it passed. She did not shrink. She looked straight ahead, and then she looked at the room, because looking straight ahead felt like hiding, and she was done hiding. And she found that when she looked at people directly, most of them looked away first, which was interesting and also clarifying. Min-jae guided her toward a table near the center without touching her, hand slightly extended, like a suggestion rather than a direction. And she followed because she chose to, and not because she was being managed. They sat. And then, 3 tables away, she saw the bride. Han-soo was beautiful in the way that certain people were beautiful. Not surprising, somehow, just confirmed, the reality matching what you'd constructed in your head without any evidence. She was looking at Min-jae with the specific expression of a woman who had once known a man very well and had not entirely finished understanding what she knew. Not longing, not regret, something more complicated. Assessment, maybe. Familiarity that had nowhere to land. She was also, Zuri registered with a small interior lurch, looking at her. Not with hostility. With something closer to curiosity. Zuri met her eyes. Sua's expression shifted. The slightest thing, almost imperceptible. And she looked away first. Min-jae was watching Zuri. "You just made this evening significantly more interesting," he said quietly into his glass. She looked at him. "Did I do something wrong?" "The opposite." He set his glass down. "She expected you to look away." "People usually do," Zuri said. "I know," he said. "That's why it's interesting." Dinner passed in a way she hadn't expected. Not the performance of endurance she'd prepared for, but something that required different muscles. Min-jae introduced her to the people at their table with her actual name and no further explanation, which somehow said more than an explanation would have. She spoke when she was spoken to and listened when she wasn't, and found that listening at a table like this was its own intelligence gathering. She learned which of the older men at the adjacent table deferred to which, and why, and where the actual gravity in the room was located. And none of it matched the social titles she'd been quietly given between the time she sat down and the time the salad course was cleared. It was after the second course that Do-hyun materialized from somewhere in the crowd, pulled up a chair without asking, and leaned toward her with the conspiratorial energy of someone who had been collecting information and couldn't contain it. "So," he said, "the woman at table 7 has been asking about you for 45 minutes. "Which woman?" "Green dress, east side, talking to the man with the silver tie who thinks he's less obvious than he is." He picked up a piece of bread from the basket. "She's the Shin family's social coordinator, which is a polite way of saying she is the person responsible for knowing everything about everyone in this room." "What does she want to know about me?" "Whether you're significant," Do-hyun said. "That's all anyone here wants to know, whether you're a statement or a distraction." He looked at her directly. "For what it's worth, you don't look like a distraction." Min-jae, who had been in quiet conversation with the man to his left, said without looking over, "Do-hyun, I'm just providing context. She doesn't need context from you." "She might, though," Do-hyun said cheerfully. "The Shin family's social coordinator has been compiling context about this table for the last hour, and it seems fair that the interested parties have comparable information." Min-jae looked at him then, just once, and something passed between them, some compression of a much longer conversation, and Do-hyun ate his bread and said nothing further. Zuri watched this exchange with the particular attention she brought to things that told her more than was being said out loud. "What is it that you actually do?" she asked Min-jae, low enough that it didn't carry past the two of them. "Not what the business card says." He looked at her for a moment. "What makes you ask?" "The way people look at you, the way the room is organized around you without you having said anything about it, the way your cousin just stopped talking." She held his gaze. "I've worked customer service for 6 years. I know the difference between someone who is important because of their title and someone who is important because of what happens when they're absent." Min-jae was quiet. "You don't have to answer," she said. I'm not asking because I need to know tonight. I'm asking because I'd like to know if there's a category of answer that would change whether I finish dinner. He looked at her for a long time. The string quartet had moved into something slower, and the noise of the room had shifted into the particular register of people settling into their evening rather than performing their arrival. There isn't, he said finally, a category that would change it. You're sure? You're already in the room, he said. Whatever I do or don't tell you, you're already here, and nothing that happens tonight is going to reach you. That's a very confident thing to say. Yes, he said, it is. She considered him. The thing about powerful men she'd observed over years of watching them from the other side of counters and desks and service windows was that most of them were performing power in the way that people perform things they were afraid of losing. The performance was the tell. The shows of certainty that were half-warning. The deliberate slowness that was actually controlled urgency. Min-jae was not performing. That was either very reassuring or the most dangerous thing about him, and she didn't know yet which one it was. She picked up her fork. Then we finished dinner, she said. Good. It was near the end of the reception, when the formal part of the evening had given way to the looser geometry of people in motion, clusters forming and dissolving, the bar drawing its own separate gravity. It was then that she found herself standing briefly alone near the edge of the room, while Min-jae was pulled aside by a man in a charcoal suit who'd approached with the kind of focused walk that said this wasn't a social conversation. She stood with her drink and watched the room the way she watched lobbies on slow nights, learning its logic. A woman stopped beside her. Late 50s, composed in the way that suggested the composition was very old and very practiced, wearing something dark and structured that was expensive without trying to look it. She looked at Zuri the way Zuri sometimes looked at new buildings, assessing their function. You're with Min-jae, the woman said. Not quite a question. I'm attending with him, Zuri said. The woman's mouth shifted slightly. Careful distinction. Seemed like an accurate one. The woman looked at her for another moment. Then, I'm curious what he told you. About what? About this evening, about these people, about why he needed someone with him. Zuri met her eyes. He told me it was a wedding. Nothing else? He told me some of the guests were influential in ways that weren't entirely public. She kept her voice even. He was accurate about that. The woman studied her with an expression Zuri couldn't fully read, something between respect and warning, possibly both, possibly the same thing dressed differently. You're not what anyone expected. People usually tell me that like it's a problem, Zuri said. Is it? The woman looked across the room to where Min-jae was standing. Whatever expression crossed her face came and went too fast to name. No, she said, finally. I don't think it is. She moved away without another word. Zuri watched her go and felt, at the base of her throat, the first real press of something she could only call unease. Not from the conversation itself, but from the particular texture of what was underneath it, the specific shape of what hadn't been said. Min-jae returned to her side moments later. He looked at the direction the woman had gone, and then at Zuri, and something changed in his face. Small, controlled, but there. Who was that? Zuri asked. He was quiet for exactly one beat too long. Min-jae. Her name is Chairman Park, he said. She oversees a significant portion of the interests represented in this room tonight. Zuri processed that. She came to talk to me specifically. Yes. Why? He looked at her directly, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something in his expression that she didn't have a clean word for. Not discomfort, not guilt. Something more like the face of a man who has been carrying a weight at a distance and just watched it arrive at the feet of someone who didn't know it was coming. Because in certain circles, he said carefully, the woman who stands beside me at a public event is not understood as a guest. The room noise continued around them. The string quartet had been replaced by something recorded, softer, the kind of music designed to fill silence without demanding attention. Somewhere behind her, Do-hyun was laughing at something. She looked at Min-jae. Then what is she understood as? He held her gaze and did not look away, which she respected even as what he said next landed in her chest like something dropped from a height. A declaration, he said. The word landed and stayed. Declaration. Zuri turned it over in her head, the way you turned something over when you were looking for the angle that made it make sense, and found instead that every angle confirmed the same thing. She had walked into a room full of people who dealt in power the way other people dealt in currency, and she had walked in on Min Jae's arm, and in the language these people spoke that meant something she had not agreed to mean. She set her glass down on the nearest surface, carefully, the way she set things down when she needed her hands free to think. "I want to be clear about something," she said. "Zuri, I want to be clear," she said again, not louder but more precise, the voice she used when a guest at the desk was starting to argue, and she needed them to understand that the conversation had a shape, and she was the one who knew it. "When you said no obligations, when that was in the document, in writing, that phrase, what exactly did you mean by it?" Min Jae looked at her with the expression of a man who had made a calculation and was now watching its consequences arrive ahead of schedule. "I meant what it said." "Then explain to me why the woman who apparently oversees a significant portion of whatever this room represents came to assess me like I was a position statement." "Because to her you are." "That's not the same as me actually being one." "No," he said. "It's not." She looked at him. The noise of the reception moved around them, and she felt it the way she felt noise during hard nights at the desk. Present, irrelevant, something her body had learned to filter because attending to it cost energy she needed elsewhere. "Did you know she would do that?" Zuri said. "When you asked me to come tonight, did you know someone like her would interpret my presence as... As what?" "As a signal." He didn't answer immediately. That was its own answer. She picked up her glass again because she needed something to do with her hand. Drank without tasting it. "Okay," she said. "It doesn't change." "I said okay." She looked at him directly. "I'm not walking out. I'm not making a scene. I came here and I'm going to finish the evening because that's what I agreed to do." She held his gaze. "But you and I are going to have a different conversation after." He nodded once. She turned back to the room and did what she'd been doing all night. Stood in it, looked at it, let it be what it was without flinching. But something had shifted in her chest. Not broken, just repositioned. The way a bone felt different after you learned it had been under pressure longer than you'd known. The car ride back to Charlotte was quiet in a way that had texture. Do-hyun, who had climbed into the front with the driver with suspicious alacrity, maintained a silence that was so uncharacteristic it was louder than anything he could have said. Zuri sat in the back beside Min Jae, with 8 inches of leather seat between them, and watched the highway lights slide past the window, and felt the evening settling over her the way cold settled. Not all at once, but gradually, finding the places where she wasn't covered. She waited until they were 15 minutes from the city before she spoke. "Who are you?" she said. Not accusatory, flat, factual, the tone of someone who has decided they would rather know than not. Min Jae looked at the passing lights. "You know what I am. I know what Chairman Park thinks you are. I know what the way that room organized itself around you implies." She turned her head to look at him. "I want to hear you say it." He turned to look at her then, and in the low moving light of the highway, she saw something in his face that she hadn't seen before. Not the stillness, not the deliberateness. Something older underneath all of that. Something tired. "The Kong organization," he said, "operates across 14 countries. Legitimate holdings in shipping, real estate, and financial services. Alongside that," he stopped, measured something. "Alongside that are operations that don't appear on any public registry." The highway noise filled the space between them. "How many people work for you?" she said. "Thousands. Across both sides. And the people in that room tonight. Associates, rivals, necessary relationships. And the woman, Chairman Park. An ally," he said, "of the complicated variety." Zuri looked at him for a long time. She was aware of Do-hyun's absolute stillness in the front seat, the studied non-movement of a man pretending he wasn't listening to the most important conversation happening around him. "The document you gave me," she said. "The 1 page. Simple language." "Yes." "That was deliberate." "Yes." "You wanted it to be readable." I wanted it to be honest. She turned back to the window. The Charlotte skyline had appeared in the distance, its cluster of lights against the December dark. She thought about what Monica had said. Go in with your eyes open. She thought about whether her eyes had been open or whether she'd looked at a door marked clearly and walked through it anyway because the number had been large enough to make the looking feel optional. I'm not afraid of you, she said. Not to reassure him, just because it was true and it seemed important to say things that were true. I know, he said. I'm also not going to pretend that what you just told me is nothing. I'm not asking you to. She nodded slowly. The car exited the highway. The city came up around them, familiar and indifferent, the same street she drove every day in a car that needed a new alternator and probably a new life in general. Tonight, she said. The second half of the payment will be in your account Monday. She nodded again. They didn't speak again until the car stopped in front of her building and Min-jae got out before she could reach the door handle, which she noted and did not comment on, and she stepped out onto the sidewalk and the cold was immediate and honest in a way the whole evening had only sometimes managed to be. She looked at him across the roof of the car. Thank you for tonight, she said, and meant it, precisely as much as she said it and not a fraction more. He looked at her, that same quality of attention. Thank you, he said, for staying. She went inside. She did not let herself think until she was in her own apartment with her shoes off and the kettle running about the fact that he'd said thank you for staying rather than thank you for coming, and that the distinction was the kind of thing she would normally have filed and forgotten and had not, this time, been able to. Yet, Monday arrived with the second payment and a silence she hadn't expected to notice. There was no follow-up message, no courtesy contact. Nothing that bridged the evening at the estate to the morning after it, which was what she had agreed to, one evening, nothing further, and which she recognized as correct and fine and exactly what the document had outlined. She went to the dry cleaning shop, steamed 3 winter coats and a wedding dress that someone had brought in 6 weeks after the wedding with a stain on the hem that she chose not to examine too closely. Fielded a call from her mother about Nia's upcoming work promotion. Said, Said that's good. Said she had to get back to work. Transferred the bill payments that night, sitting at her kitchen table with her laptop and the same spreadsheet she'd been maintaining for 3 years, watching the numbers change in a way that made her feel something she couldn't immediately name. Not relief exactly. Relief would have felt lighter. This felt like setting down something heavy and finding out that the absence of weight was also, strangely, its own kind of loss. Monica knocked on her door at 9, bearing wine and the expression of someone who had been practicing restraint for 3 days and was done with it. Okay, Monica said, sitting down on the couch. Tell me. Zuri told her. The room, the attention, Chairman Park, the car ride. What Min-jae had said about the organization. She told it the way she told things to Monica, without softening it, but without performing the drama of it either. Just the sequence of what had happened and what it had meant as best she could determine. Monica was quiet all the way through, which was its own kind of event. He told you the truth, Monica said when she'd finished, when I asked directly. That's more than most men manage. It's a low bar. Most bars are. Monica turned her wine glass in her hands. Are you going to see him again? He's checking out Wednesday. That's not what I asked. Zuri looked at her. I don't know, she said. And I think I need to be honest about the fact that I don't know, which is harder than just saying no and meaning it. Monica looked at her for a long time. Then, you like him. I don't know him. You like what you've seen. She didn't answer, which was also an answer. Zuri? Monica set her glass down. What are you actually afraid of? She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, the way she thought about things when she was doing it right rather than performing consideration. That it's the same thing, she said finally. Different version, man with more resources, different world, same ending. The part where I find out I was the temporary option and just didn't read the terms correctly. Monica absorbed that. And if it isn't? Then I'd have to figure out what to do with something I haven't had before. She looked at her hands. I'm better at problems than I am at that. He came back to the lobby on Tuesday. She was mid-shift, The quiet part of the night when the hotel ran on its own momentum and the lobby had its usual population of insomniacs and late arrivals, and one man who'd been sitting in the corner with the same cup of coffee for 2 hours and seemed to be writing something or possibly just staring at something she couldn't see. Min-jae walked in at 12:40 and didn't approach the desk. He sat in the seating area, ordered a coffee from the overnight server, opened nothing, looked at nothing in particular. She watched this for approximately 4 minutes, handling the 2 check-ins that came through in that window, and then, when the lobby had quieted again, she walked from behind the desk and crossed to where he was sitting and stood there until he looked up. "You're not checking out until tomorrow," she said. "I'm aware." "So you don't need anything from the desk?" "No." She looked at him. He looked back. The lobby hummed quietly around them. "Then why are you down here?" she said. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to recognize, the one that preceded a statement he'd already decided to make and was simply timing correctly. "Because the room is quiet," he said, "and I've been sitting in quiet rooms for 20 years and they've never bothered me until this week." She stood very still. "I'm not asking anything from you," he said. "I know what the document said. I know what tonight is." He looked at his coffee, then back at her. "I just wanted to be in the room where you were working." It was possibly the most stripped-down thing anyone had said to her in years. No architecture around it, no performance. She stood there for another moment. Then she went back behind the desk, because she was working, and she didn't say anything further, but she also didn't ask him to leave. He stayed until 3:30. Ordered a second coffee. Did not speak to her again except once, around 2, when a guest came in distressed about a noise complaint and Zuri handled it. Calm, thorough, the situation resolved in under 6 minutes. And Min-jae said quietly from across the lobby, 3 problems, simultaneously, no complaint. She didn't look up from the desk, but the corner of her mouth did something she chose not to examine. He left when her replacement arrived. She watched him go through the lobby doors and thought about what Monica had asked, "What are you actually afraid of?" and found that the answer had shifted slightly in the last 3 hours in a direction she wasn't entirely prepared for. He didn't check out on Wednesday. She found out from the day shift, casually, the way you found out things at the desk, overhearing the handoff notes. That sweet 16 had extended for another week. She processed this information with the same expression she used for everything and then went home and stared at her ceiling for 40 minutes before getting up and making coffee. He texted that evening, "Extended the stay. Business has required it. That's the only reason I'm telling you, so it isn't strange if you see me in the lobby." She stared at the text for a long time. Then she wrote back, "It would have been stranger if you hadn't." He sent nothing further, which she found, inexplicably, more comfortable than most extended conversations she'd had in recent memory. The following Sunday, she called her mother and listened to the update about Nia's promotion and her father's new medication adjustment and the neighbor's fence dispute, and said, and that's good. And then her mother said, in the particular tone that meant she'd been building to something for the last several minutes, "Are you seeing anyone?" Zuri stopped. "No," she said. "You should think about that, Zuri. A woman your age, Mama." "I'm just saying, Nia has Marcus now, and they're very happy, and I think when you see what that looks like, I see what it looks like. Then you understand why I worry. You work so hard, and you're so—" A pause. The specific pause that Zuri had grown up interpreting through a range of possible meanings. "You're so capable. I just want someone to see that." She held the phone against her ear and looked at the wall of her kitchen. The paint was the color of an intention she'd had 3 years ago to repaint it something warmer, which she'd never gotten around to, which she'd stopped noticing until just now. "Someone does," she said, before she could decide whether to. A short silence. "Who?" "Doesn't matter yet," she said. "I'll talk to you next Sunday, Mama." She hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment with the particular feeling of having said something true that she hadn't planned to say, and finding that the truth was smaller and more manageable than the keeping of it had been. He was in the lobby Thursday night again, this time with purpose. He had a question about the hotel's event space, whether it could be rented for a small private meeting, and the question was legitimate and she answered it, but he stayed after the question was answered, sitting again in the same chair, and this time she brought him the coffee herself, because the overnight server had gone on break, and because she was tired of pretending the lobby had a clear enough line for her to be on one side of it. She put the coffee on the table, and he looked up at her, and she sat down in the chair across from him, which was technically a violation of about 4 front desk protocols, none of which she cared about at 12:50 on a Thursday night. "Tell me something I wouldn't find in a business profile," she said. He thought about it. "I don't sleep well in any time zone." "Why?" "Because there's always something that needs watching." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "You get used to it. Then one day you realize you can't remember what it felt like not to." "How long has it been?" "Since I slept well." He considered. 12 years. "What happened 12 years ago?" A pause. "My father died. I took over what he'd built. He said it the way people said things that had been facts for so long they'd lost their edge. The organization was in conflict. I spent the first 3 years keeping it alive. By the time it was stable, I'd forgotten how to not be at war." She looked at him. "Do you ever want to stop?" He looked back. "Every person in my position says they want to stop," he said. "Very few of them mean it. The ones who mean it usually already have a reason to." She didn't ask what that meant. She understood what it meant, and the understanding was the kind that required her to look away for a moment, out at the lobby's quiet, the insomniac in the corner who had returned with a new cup of coffee and what appeared to be a crossword. "I have a question for you," he said. "Okay." "The man you came to work for, the one who pays you in installments and whose bills you cover from 2 jobs at 28 years old." He held her gaze. "Does he know what you're doing for him?" The question landed cleanly. She didn't flinch. "He's my father, and no." "Why not?" "Because if he knew, he'd feel like a burden," she said. "And if he felt like a burden, it would break something in him that I don't think would heal." She looked at her hands. "Some things you carry because the carrying is less damage than the telling." Min-jae was quiet for a long time. "I know what that is," he said finally. "I know you do," she said. The photograph appeared on a Friday. She found it the way most people found things they weren't looking for. By looking for something else, scrolling through her phone during her lunch break at the dry cleaning shop, and there it was, a photograph of the wedding reception, taken by someone and posted somewhere, and then picked up by something that specialized in the kind of coverage that dressed itself as information, but was actually something else. The photograph showed her walking into the ballroom on Min-jae's arm. Someone had caught it from an angle that was flattering to neither of them specifically, but was very flattering to the idea of them as a thing to be speculated about. The caption named him Korean business magnate Kang Min-jae, and then described her the way certain publications described black women at events where they were unexpected, as a mystery, as an anomaly, as a presence requiring explanation. The comments were not the caption. She read approximately 11 of them before she put her phone face down on the counter and stood very still with her hands flat on the cloth-padded pressing surface and breathed through the particular quality of seeing yourself reflected in language that wants to diminish you, which was something she had significant experience with and which still, every time, required a moment. "A woman her shape," someone had written, in a world like his. Another, "He's making a point, not a choice." Another, "She probably doesn't even know where she is." She picked the phone back up, scrolled further. The photograph was on 4 separate sites by now that she could find with a quick search, and on each one the comments had their own specific texture of cruelty. Some performative, some reflexive, some so old and so embedded in the writer's bones that they probably didn't recognize them as cruelty at all, just as honesty. She put her phone in her pocket and finished the shift. She didn't call Monica. She didn't call anyone. She drove home, changed out of her work clothes, and sat at her kitchen table with the specific kind of exhaustion that didn't come from the body, but from the repeated experience of being looked at in a way that required you to defend your own existence. She was in that specific exhaustion when her phone rang. Unknown number, which she normally didn't answer, but something made her pick up. I'm aware of the photographs, Min-jae said. His voice was different, not cold exactly, but compressed. The voice of someone managing something. She almost said something reflexive. Something that would have been fine, I know, don't worry about it. The automatic deflection she'd been building since childhood when things hurt, and she didn't want anyone to see the hurt because the seeing always cost more than the hiding. She didn't say it. I read the comments, she said instead. A silence. Not empty. Full. By tomorrow morning, he said carefully, the photographs will be removed from every platform they appeared on. She sat with that. You're going to have them taken down. Yes. How? I have people who handle these things. She thought about what that meant, about the kind of organization that had people who handled things, and what kind of things those people were accustomed to handling, and how a set of gossip photographs existed somewhere on that list. You don't have to do that, she said. I know. I've dealt with worse than this. I know that too, he said. I'm still doing it. She looked at her kitchen wall, the unpainted wall, the color of an intention. Okay, she said. Is there anything else? Min-jae, she stopped, felt the shape of what she was about to say, and then said it anyway because she was tired of carrying things quietly and calling it strength. Thank you. She heard him breathe in, then out, slow and deliberate. You don't need to thank me for this, he said. This is basic. Nobody's covered basic for me in a very long time, she said, so I'm thanking you for it. Another silence. This one felt different from all the others. Warmer, maybe, or heavier. She wasn't sure which. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. Why are you still in Charlotte? The question sat between them on the phone line. She heard a sound in the background on his end, something ambient, the hotel room, she thought, a window or an HVAC system. Because I keep finding reasons, he said. She closed her eyes for a moment, opened them. That's not an answer. I know, he said. I'm still working on the honest version. She almost said something, almost, but the almost was the important part. The part that meant she wasn't ready yet, not quite. And she knew the difference between not ready and not wanting, even if other people in her life had always collapsed that distinction. Good night, Min-jae, she said. Good night, Zuri. She sat in the kitchen for another 10 minutes after hanging up, listening to the ambient sound of her building. The couple above her, the TV through the wall, Monica's music that she always played too loud when she was cooking, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. The specific sensation of having been looked for. Not evaluated, not assessed, not observed from the position of someone cataloging what you lacked. Looked for. Like she was the location someone was trying to reach. She was working the following Monday when Do-hyun appeared at her desk at 1 a.m. with the expression of a man who had been sitting on information for several days and had finally run out of room. He turned down the arrangement, Do-hyun said without preamble. She looked up from the booking system. What arrangement? The one his mother has been engineering for the last 6 months. He leaned on the counter. Han Ji-yoon, the daughter of the Song-ji family. They run most of the East Coast operations between here and Boston. He held her gaze. It was supposed to be announced at the wedding we attended, a show of unity between the Kang and Song-ji interests. Min-jae agreed, in principle, 3 months ago. Zuri's hands stopped moving on the keyboard. He declined formally last week, Do-hyun said, the day after you told him you'd handle the boutique yourself. The lobby ran its quiet nighttime business around her. Someone came through the door from outside, letting in a brief knife of cold air. The elevator chimed. Why are you telling me this? She said. Because his mother is now on a plane from Seoul, Do-hyun said. She lands Thursday. And she is not... He stopped, chose words. She is not someone who accepts outcomes she didn't choose, and she will want to meet the reason. Zuri looked at him for a long time. Does he know you're telling me this? No. Then why? Because someone should have told you what you were walking into before you walked into it, Do-hyun said. And since my cousin is very good at protecting people from information while believing he's protecting them from harm, he held up his hands. Someone has to be the person who tells you the truth before Thursday. She absorbed this. What does his mother know about me? She said. Everything, Do-hyun said simply. She had a full briefing within 48 hours of the hotel check-in. That's who she is. Zuri looked at the desk surface, the booking system, the paper backup she still kept in the drawer out of habit. She thought about a woman on a plane from Seoul who already knew her name and her job, and probably the balance of her bank account before and after the payment, and who was coming specifically because her son had made a choice this woman had not made for him. What does she want? Zuri said. Do-hyun looked at her steadily. To determine whether you're a disruption or a threat. Those are different things. To most people, yes. He straightened up from the counter. To Kang Ji-won, a disruption gets managed, a threat gets removed. The word sat in the air between them. Removed. Zuri looked at him. And which one does she think I am? Do-hyun's expression was the most honest she'd seen it. That, he said quietly, depends entirely on what happens Thursday. She held his gaze, felt the evening close in around her, the lobby, the quiet hotel, the familiar geometry of the desk she'd stood behind for years, and understood that she was standing at the exact edge of something she had not agreed to stand at the edge of, looking down into a question that had not been part of any document, any clause, any careful paragraph of mutual terms, and that the answer she gave, even without speaking it yet, would not be reversible. She didn't sleep Monday night. Not the restless kind of sleeplessness where you're almost there and keep getting pulled back. The fully awake kind, where your body understands that sleep would be irresponsible given the information currently in the room. She lay on her back and stared at the ceiling and thought about Thursday with the same methodical attention she brought to bill spreadsheets and paper reservation systems. Not panicking, just calculating, running the numbers until she understood what she was actually dealing with. What she was actually dealing with was this. A woman she'd never met already knew who she was, had known since almost the beginning, and was currently on a plane crossing 11 time zones specifically because of her. Not despite her. Because of her. The distinction mattered. She turned it over until morning. She called in sick to the dry cleaning shop for the first time in 14 months, which told her something about her own state that she filed away and didn't examine too closely. Then she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table and did what she always did when something was too large to think about directly. She thought about its edges. The edges were, Do-hyun had told her without Min-jae's knowledge. Min-jae had turned down an arrangement without telling her that was what he was turning down. Kang Ji-won was coming Thursday, and the question of whether Zuri was a disruption or a threat depended on what happened Thursday, which was a condition attached to an event she had not been invited to and had not agreed to participate in. She pulled out her phone and called Min-jae. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he was already awake, which meant he either always woke at 6 or he also hadn't slept. Your cousin came to see me last night, she said. A silence. Then evenly, what did he tell you? Everything he thought you should have told me. Another silence, longer, with a different texture. Zuri, your mother lands Thursday. Yes. She knows who I am. Yes. And you were going to tell me this when... He didn't answer that immediately, and the non-answer was its own answer, and she felt it land in the same place things landed when she'd been right about something she'd hoped to be wrong about. I was managing the situation, he said finally. You were managing me. I was trying to... Min-jae. She kept her voice flat. Not angry. Anger was something she'd learned to hold back from her voice because anger from women her size was read as threat, and she'd spent enough energy correcting that misread to know it wasn't worth the cost. I need you to understand something. I have 2 jobs. I track every dollar my parents owe. I handle everything that comes at me, and I do it by having accurate information about the situation I'm walking into. She paused. What you did, deciding what I needed to know and what I didn't, that's not protection. That's the same thing everyone in my life has done when they decided my comfort was less important than their management of a situation. The line was very quiet. You're right, he said. She hadn't expected that. Not that fast, not that cleanly. My mother is not... He stopped, started differently. She is not someone I could have prepared you for with a phone call. That's not an excuse. That's context. What is she? The person who built everything I inherited and has never forgiven me for the ways I've changed it. He said this carefully, the way people said things that were true and old and had worn deep grooves. She believes the organization requires specific alliances. She believes those alliances require specific marriages. She has believed this for 30 years, and nothing I have done has moved her. And you declined one of those marriages. I declined the most recent one, yes. Because of me. A pause. Because of myself, he said. You were the reason I could see the decision clearly. That's different from being the cause of it. She thought about that distinction, found it more careful than she'd expected. What does she want from Thursday? Zuri said. To see you. To determine whether you're... Do-hyun told me the categories. Then you know what she'll be doing when she meets you. What I don't know, Zuri said, is what you want me to do about it. The silence this time was different from all the others. Not the silence of calculation or the silence of management. The silence of a man who had an answer and wasn't sure it was fair to say it. I want you to meet her, he said, but I'm not going to ask you to. Why not? Because asking you would mean asking you to walk into something I can't guarantee you'll walk out of the same. She looked at the kitchen wall, the unpainted wall, the intention she'd never gotten around to. Has anyone ever said no to her? Zuri said. He almost laughed. She heard the shape of it even though it didn't become sound. In my entire life, he said. Twice. Once was a banker in Tokyo. The second was me, last week. A pause. She's still deciding what to do about both. Zuri set her coffee cup down. Tell me where and when. Zuri? Tell me where and when, Min-jae. Thursday came in cold and deliberate, the kind of morning that didn't apologize for what it was. Zuri woke at 6, showered, put on the black dress, not the emerald, not the special, the professional, and stood in front of her mirror for 1 minute. She was not the woman in the photographs with the dismissive captions. She was not her mother's worry or Evan Brooks's polite refusal or any of the spaces other people had tried to fit her into. She was a 28-year-old woman who had been managing impossible situations since she was 19, and she was going to walk into a room with a woman who had spent decades deciding who was permitted to exist in her son's world, and she was going to do it the only way she'd ever done anything, as herself, completely. Monica knocked at 7:15. She didn't say anything when Zuri opened the door, just looked at her the way she always looked at her before something important, the full inventory look, and then nodded once. You're ready, Monica said. I'm terrified, Zuri said. Same thing, Monica said. Call me when it's done. Bisa. The restaurant was in the kind of building that had been renovated to look less expensive than it was, which was itself a form of expense. Private dining room in the back, reserved. The kind of reservation that required no confirmation because the people making it didn't operate in a world where things required confirmation. Min-jae was outside when she arrived. He was wearing a dark suit, and he was standing with his hands in his coat pockets, and he looked at her when she walked up with an expression she'd only seen on him in fragments before. Unguarded, just for a moment, the face underneath the face. You came, he said. I said I would. He looked at her for a moment, then, she's already inside. How long has she been here? 20 minutes? She came early. She always comes early. He held her gaze. Are you? Don't ask me if I'm okay, she said. I'll be okay when it's over. Ask me something useful. He thought about it. She'll test you, he said. Not aggressively. She's too disciplined for that. She'll ask you questions that sound like small talk and aren't. She'll watch how you respond to the ones that don't have comfortable answers. And what do you want me to do? What you always do, he said. Answer honestly. Don't manage her. She'll know. He paused. She already knows more than most people learn. What she doesn't know yet is whether what she knows is the whole picture. Zuri looked at the restaurant door. Is she going to be rude to me? Possibly. About my appearance. He held her gaze steadily. Possibly. Okay. She squared her shoulders. Not performance, just the body correcting toward its real height. Then let's go. Kang Ji-won was 71 years old and looked 60 and carried herself like 50, which was to say she carried herself like a woman who had never wasted energy on anything, including the performance of aging. She was seated at the center of the table rather than one end, which Zuri clocked immediately as a positioning choice. The center was not a guest seat, it was a host seat, and this was not her restaurant. She was smaller than Zuri had constructed in her head. Most significant people were. But the size didn't diminish her because her size had nothing to do with it. She looked at Zuri the way Chairman Park had looked at her at the wedding, with assessment. But where Park's assessment had been curious, Ji-won's was clinical. She was reading something, and she intended to finish reading it before anyone spoke. Zuri looked back, didn't fill the silence with a smile or a greeting or any of the reflexive social softening she'd been trained to provide since childhood. Ji-won's expression shifted, fractionally. Not approval, something more like the involuntary recognition of a variable that had not been in the original equation. Sit down, Ji-won said, in English. Perfect English with the particular formality of someone who had learned it as a tool rather than a language. They sat. Min-jae beside Zuri, Ji-won across. A server appeared, poured water, disappeared. Nobody had ordered anything, and Ji-won didn't look at the menu. You work at a hotel, Ji-won said. Among other places, Zuri said. 2 jobs. Yes. To support your family. To supplement what they can't cover, yes. Ji-won held her gaze. Your father, his health. Is a private matter, Zuri said, that I'm happy to discuss with people who are asking because they care about it, rather than because they want to establish the parameters of my dependency. A silence. Min-jae beside her was very still. Ji-won looked at her for a long moment. Then she made a sound. Not quite a laugh, not quite dismissal. Something in between that was almost something warmer. My son tells me you're perceptive, Ji-won said. Your son is generous. He is many things. Ji-won looked at Min-jae briefly with the specific look of mothers who have strong opinions about their children and have been expressing them for decades. Generous is not typically how I'd describe him. Back to Zuri. You read the room at the wedding. I read most rooms. Chairman Park said you held eye contact when she expected you to look away. Looking away didn't seem useful. Most people in that room would have found reasons to look away. I'm not most people in that room, Zuri said. I wasn't pretending to be. Ji-won's hands were flat on the table. They were, Zuri noticed, the hands of someone who had worked physically for years before the working became abstract. A specific kind of wear that expensive manicures couldn't entirely cover, the wear of someone who had built something from the ground with the actual ground still in the lines. What do you know about what my son does? Ji-won said. Enough, Zuri said. He told me when I asked directly. And you stayed. I was already there. The question was what to do with what I knew. Most women in your position would have, I'm not in a position, Zuri said. I'm a person. There's a difference. She kept her voice level. Not combative, just precise. I understand what you're doing in this conversation. I understand the questions that sound like small talk and aren't. And I'm willing to sit here and answer all of them honestly because I think honesty is the only thing that's worth anything in a room like this. She paused. But I'm not going to perform smallness to make this easier on anyone. The room was very quiet. Ji-won looked at her with an expression Zuri couldn't fully name. Then she looked at Min-jae. Min-jae looked back at his mother with an expression that was, Zuri realized with a start, the closest thing to open she had seen on him since the hotel lobby in the storm. Ji-won made a sound, low, almost private. Then she looked back at Zuri. The Songji arrangement, she said. You know about it. Yes. And you know he declined it. Yes. Do you understand what that cost? Zuri looked at her steadily. I understand it cost something significant. I didn't ask him to. That's not the same as not being the reason. No, Zuri said. It isn't. She held Jiwon's gaze. I'm not going to apologize for existing in a way that affected his decision. He made the decision. He's a grown man who runs an organization across 14 countries. I think we can reasonably assume he's capable of understanding the weight of a choice. Something moved across Jiwon's face, quick and controlled, but there. The Songji family, Jiwon said, is not going to accept the withdrawal quietly. I imagine not. This means conflict. For the organization. For my son. She kept her eyes on Zuri. And by extension, for anyone associated with him. The word anyone landed with the precision Jiwon intended it to land with. Zuri felt it in her sternum. Felt the specific weight of it. The implication about vulnerability, about leverage, about the things that happen to people in certain worlds when they became useful as pressure points. She didn't look away. Then he should have thought about that before he made the choice, Zuri said. And if he thought about it and made it anyway, that's his to carry, not mine. She paused. I'm not responsible for decisions I wasn't consulted on, and I'm not going to let the consequences of those decisions be used to tell me where I belong. The silence stretched. Jiwon was looking at her with an expression Zuri still couldn't name. Min-jae beside her had gone very still in the particular way he went still when something was happening that he hadn't anticipated. Then Jiwon said quietly, almost to herself, Your mother told you that you'd have to work twice as hard for half as much. Zuri's chest tightened. How do you know that? Because every mother says it when she doesn't know what else to give. Jiwon's hands moved slightly on the table, and because the women who heard that and believed it walk into rooms the same way, like they expect to be asked to leave. She looked at Zuri. You walk in like you expect to be asked to prove something, which is different. Zuri looked at her. That's also not a compliment, Jiwon said. It's an observation. I know, Zuri said. The proving is exhausting, Jiwon said, and it never ends. The people who require it will always find the next proof they need. I know that too. Jiwon looked at her for a long time. Then she turned to Min-jae. Leave us, she said. Min-jae looked at his mother, then at Zuri. Zuri held his gaze and gave him the smallest nod. She was fine, she was handling it. Go. And he stood, put his hand briefly on the back of her chair in a gesture that was almost nothing and was somehow everything, and walked out. The door closed. Jiwon waited until the sound of it settled. He hasn't looked at anyone the way he looks at you since before his father died, she said. I want you to understand that I'm telling you this not to soften you, but because it is relevant information. Zuri breathed carefully. Okay. It is also relevant information that I have spent 20 years ensuring this organization survives. Every choice I have made, every alliance, every arrangement, everything I have required of him, has been in service of that. She held Zuri's gaze. I am not a sentimental woman. I can see that. And I'm telling you that the look on my son's face when he walked in here with you, she stopped. Something moved across her face, old and careful, and not entirely hard. I had forgotten that look existed in him. Zuri held very still. I am not going to tell you that I approve, Jiwon said. I'm going to tell you that my approval is not the thing you need to be concerned about. She leaned back slightly. The Songji family will make contact in the next 7 days. They will do it through channels that are not official and not polite, and they will be looking for the most efficient way to communicate their objection to my son's withdrawal. Zuri's mouth was dry. Meaning you, Jiwon said simply, are efficient. The word sat between them like an object on the table. So you're warning me, Zuri said. I'm informing you, Jiwon said. There is a difference. A warning suggests you have a choice about whether to receive the information. This is not optional information. What do they want? To demonstrate to Min-jae that withdrawing from the arrangement has a cost he wasn't willing to calculate. Jiwon's voice was even, clinical. The voice of someone describing weather. They won't touch him. He's too established, but someone less established. I have 2 jobs and a bank account that was negative last month, Zuri said. You don't have to be powerful to be useful to them, Jiwon said. You only have to matter to him. The restaurant hummed quietly around them, a muffled sound from the front of the building, someone arriving, the host's voice. Normal sounds, the sounds of a world that didn't know it was sharing air with a conversation about leverage and damage. Zuri looked at her hands flat on the table. She thought about her parents, their address, her father's new medication sitting in a pharmacy under her name, the dry cleaning shop where everyone knew her schedule. She thought about what it meant to matter to someone in a world where mattering was a liability. "What are my options?" she said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it for being steady. "Functionally?" Ji-won considered. "Disappear. Remove yourself from the equation before the equation resolves itself around you. The Song-ji family loses their leverage point and moves on to a different strategy." She paused. "Or stay. And trust that Min-jae's capacity to manage what follows is what he believes it to be." "Those aren't equal options." "No," Ji-won said. "They aren't. The first one is the safe one." "The first one," Ji-won said, "is the one that costs him something he hasn't had in 12 years. The way she said it, not plea, not manipulation, just fact, was more effective than either would have been. Zuri looked at her. "You came here to tell me to stay," she said slowly. Ji-won's expression didn't change. "I came here to give you accurate information. What you do with it is not my decision." "But you think I should stay?" "I think," Ji-won said carefully, "that my son has never declined anything in 20 years except this. And I think that a woman who can sit across from me for 40 minutes without once performing smallness is not the kind of woman who makes decisions based on what is simply safe." A silence. Zuri's heartbeat was loud in her own ears, steady but loud, the sound of the body taking the situation seriously. "If I stay," she said, "the Song-ji family will be managed," Ji-won said. "Not immediately, not cleanly, but managed. By Min-jae. By Min-jae, and by the considerable resources he has spent 20 years building precisely for situations where the world does not cooperate with his decisions." Zuri thought about Min-jae's face on the phone the night the photographs appeared, the particular compressed quality of his voice, which she now understood was not coldness, but the sound of a man who had spent so long holding things together that the holding had become indistinguishable from his breathing. She thought about the hand he'd put on the back of her chair. Almost nothing. Somehow everything. She thought about walking out of this restaurant and back to the apartment and the spreadsheet and the 2 jobs and the Sunday calls and all of it intact, safe, unchanged, hers. And she thought about what Do-hyun had said that very first night. He's very good at protecting people from information while believing he's protecting them from harm. Someone had finally told her the truth. All of it, before she needed to walk into it. She looked at Kang Ji-won across the white tablecloth and understood, with a clarity that felt physical, that this woman had not come to Charlotte to end something. She had come to see if the thing was worth the cost of continuing, and she had looked at Zuri for 40 minutes and made a determination that she would not say directly, because saying it directly was not how she operated and possibly not who she was, and she had said it sideways, in the only language she apparently knew for tenderness, which was the language of accurate information delivered without softening. "I'm going to need a few days," Zuri said. Ji-won nodded once. "You have until Monday. The Song-ji contact will likely come Wednesday at the earliest." "How do you know?" "Because I know how they operate," Ji-won said. "And because I told them Min-jae was reconsidering. That buys approximately 5 days of inaction while they wait to see if the problem resolves itself." Zuri stared at her. "You told them he was reconsidering." "I told them what I needed to tell them to give you time to make a decision without a clock on it." Ji-won held her gaze. "I said I was not a sentimental woman. I didn't say I was inflexible." Zuri looked at her for a long moment. "He doesn't know you did that," she said. "No." "Are you going to tell him?" "That," Ji-won said, and something moved across her face that was the closest thing to wry that Zuri had seen on her, "will depend on what you decide by Monday." Min-jae was waiting in the hallway outside the private dining room, not pacing, standing. The practiced stillness that she now understood was not calm, but the shape he'd learned to give to the absence of calm. He looked at her face when she came through the door, and she watched him read it, the careful, complete attention he brought to everything, running the input, calibrating. "Are you all right?" he said. She stopped, started again. "Your mother is not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know, something easier to be angry at." He held her gaze. "What did she say?" "Mostly accurate information," Zuri said, "which is apparently how she says everything." He breathed out, slow. "The Songji situation." "She told me." Zuri looked at him. "Minjae, why didn't you tell me?" He looked at her with the specific expression of a man who had answered this question fully, privately, many times, and knew that the private answer and the spoken answer were not the same thing and had been trying to figure out how to close the distance. "Because I didn't want you to leave," he said, "and I knew if I told you, the choice I was giving you was to stay or to leave, and I didn't want to be the reason you left." He held her gaze, which I understand is precisely the wrong way to approach someone who has spent her entire life being given incomplete information about situations she was about to walk into. The hallway was empty. The muffled restaurant sounds, the ambient presence of a building conducting its normal business around the abnormal thing happening in its hallway. "Yeah," she said. "It is." "I know." She looked at him. She was tired, the specific tiredness of having sat across from two Kangs in one morning and held her ground and kept her voice and her spine both straight. Her feet hurt in the shoes she'd worn because they were the most professional shoes she owned and not because they were comfortable. Her hands were cold. "I need a few days," she said. He nodded. "Okay." "I'm not—" She stopped. She wasn't going to say "I'm not leaving" because she didn't know yet if that was true. "I need to think." "Okay," he said again. He said it the way he'd said it the first time she'd needed something from him he couldn't control, without trying to manage the outcome, which was not nothing. She walked past him toward the exit. "Zuri." She stopped but didn't turn. "Whatever you decide," he said quietly enough that it was only for her, only in that hallway, only between the two of them. "I want you to make it because it's what you want, not because of what anyone else needs from you." She stood in the hallway and felt those words go into her the way cold went in. All at once, finding every place she wasn't covered. She walked out. The December air hit her across the face, and she stood on the sidewalk for a moment and breathed it in. This cold, this city, these streets she knew, and tried to locate herself in the specific chaos of the last week, the way she located herself on a bad night at the desk. Find the thing that's stable, stand on that, and work outward. The stable thing was this. She was still herself, still standing, still, after everything, the woman who solved 3 problems simultaneously and didn't wait to be asked. Her phone buzzed. "Monica. How'd it go?" She looked at the message. Then she typed, still deciding. Monica's response came in 4 seconds. "Whatever you decide, I'll be here." She put her phone in her pocket and stood on the sidewalk outside a restaurant where Minjae's mother had just spent 40 minutes determining whether she was a disruption or a threat, and had apparently landed somewhere that was neither. And she thought about Monday and thought about Wednesday and thought about the Songji family and what the word leverage meant when it was applied to a person rather than a financial instrument, and felt the full weight of where she was standing, at the absolute center of something she had not chosen to be at the center of and could not now step out of cleanly, not without cost, not without leaving something she had only just begun to recognize as worth the cost of staying. Her hands were still cold. She started walking. She walked for 40 minutes, not toward anything specific, just walked, the way she walked when the math wouldn't resolve and she needed her body to do something while her brain finished its work. Charlotte moved around her at its December pace. People in coats, coffee cups, a bus exhaling at a red light, a woman with a stroller navigating around a construction barrier with the focused determination of someone who had stopped expecting the world to move for her. Zuri watched the woman with the stroller and thought about what Jiwon had said. The proving is exhausting, and it never ends. She thought about her mother's voice, sturdy, The word her mother used when she meant something that could take weight. Not beautiful, not chosen, useful. Built for load-bearing. She thought about Evan Brooks' laugh. Short and uncomfortable and overfast. The laugh of a man trying to exit a situation that had been created by someone else's inconvenient feelings. She had replayed that laugh in her lowest moments for 2 years as evidence of something. She was no longer sure what it had been evidence of, except possibly that Evan Brooks was not a particularly brave man. She thought about Min-jae's hand on the back of her chair, the almost nothing of it. She stopped at a corner and waited for the light, and a cold wind came down the street and found every gap in her coat, and she stood in it and let it. The light changed. She called Monica. "Talk," Monica said, picking up on the second ring. "His mother warned me that a rival family might use me as leverage against him." She said it plainly because Monica didn't need it softened. Because he declined an arranged marriage, apparently declining it made me adjacent to a political conflict that I didn't agree to be adjacent to. Monica was quiet for 3 seconds. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes, I'm on a sidewalk." "Okay." A breath. "What does leverage mean in this context?" "Pressure. They make something difficult for me. It sends a message to him about the cost of his choices." "Something difficult like, I don't know the specifics, but you know the category." "Yes." Monica was quiet again, longer this time, which from Monica was significant. "And you're trying to decide." "I'm trying to decide." "If you were one of your parents' bills," Monica said slowly, "you would have figured out the answer already." Zuri stopped walking. "If this was a number on a spreadsheet," Monica continued, "you would have done the math and made the call and not lost 1 minute of sleep wondering if you were smart enough to figure it out, because you always figure it out." A pause. "So what's different?" "Because if I get the math wrong on a bill, it's late fees," Zuri said. "If I get this wrong, you get it wrong, and someone who has been solving every hard problem in his path for 20 years is on your side." Monica's voice was careful, not pushy, just honest. "I'm not telling you it's not dangerous. I'm asking you whether you've ever in your life had a problem that you faced with that kind of backup." Zuri stood on the sidewalk. "No," she said. "Right," Monica said. "So maybe what's actually different this time isn't the danger. Maybe what's different is that for the first time, you don't have to calculate alone." The wind came again. She turned her face into it slightly, an old habit from childhood, something her grandmother had told her once about facing cold directly rather than hunching against it. "I'll call you later," she said. "I know you will," Monica said. "Yeah." She texted Min-jae at 4 in the afternoon. "I've decided. Meet me at the hotel at 8. He texted back in under a minute. "I'll be there." She spent the intervening hours doing what she did. The dry cleaning shop called to check on her, and she told them she'd be in tomorrow. She paid 2 bills online that she'd been holding until the second half of his payment cleared. Which it had. She called her father and talked to him for 20 minutes about nothing in particular, the easy conversation they had when her mother wasn't on the line, the one that sounded like who they'd been before everything got hard. Her father said near the end, "You sound different." "Different how?" "Like something's been decided," he said. "You always sound lighter when something's been decided." She thought about telling him, about the hotel and the man and the Wednesday flight from Seoul and the 40-minute conversation over an untouched table. Thought about it and didn't because the time wasn't right, and possibly also because she needed to live in the decision for a moment before she gave it to anyone else to hold. "I'm fine, Daddy," she said. "I'll call Sunday." "Bring yourself," he said, the thing he always said. The thing that had always annoyed her faintly, because of course she'd bring herself. What else would she bring? But tonight it landed differently. Tonight it sounded like he knew there were circumstances under which a person might not. "Yeah," she said. "I will." Bob. She wasn't working that night. She'd come to the hotel as herself, in her own coat, without the lanyard and the protocol and the careful professional warmth. She sat in the seating area she'd watched Min-jae sit in on the nights he came down, not because he needed anything from the desk, but because the room was too quiet and she was in it. She'd been there 12 minutes when he walked through the lobby doors. He looked at her in the seating area, in the chair he usually occupied. and something crossed his face that she had learned enough by now to read. Relief. Specifically the relief of a man who had spent 3 days preparing for an outcome and finding out the preparation wasn't needed. He sat across from her. Same configuration as the nights he came down, the same geometry, except this time she was on his side of it. "I'm staying," she said. He held her gaze. "Okay." "I need you to understand what that means," she said. "Not for your organization. For me." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees. "I am not going to disappear into whatever this world is. I have 2 jobs and a family and a neighbor who would lose her mind if I stopped being reachable. I'm not walking away from any of that. I'm not asking you to. I know you're not asking. I'm telling you that it's not on the table, not negotiable, not something that adjusts over time to accommodate what's convenient for the organization." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm also telling you that what your mother said about the Songji family, I heard it. I'm not pretending I didn't hear it, and I'm choosing to stay anyway, which means I need you to trust that I made that choice with full information and I don't need to be protected from the consequences of it." Min-jae was quiet. "The thing you did," she said. "Not telling me about the arrangement, not telling me your mother was coming, deciding what I needed to know based on what you thought I could handle." She stopped. "You can't do that again. Not once. Because the one thing I have built my entire life on is knowing what I'm walking into. And if you take that from me, it doesn't matter what else you give me." He held her gaze for a long time. Then he said, "I know. I need more than that. I know that too." He leaned forward, matching her posture. "I have spent 20 years making decisions about what information was necessary for which people. It's a reflex. It's not an excuse." He held her gaze. "I won't do it again. And when I want to, because I will want to, because that reflex doesn't disappear. I'll tell you that I want to, and I won't act on it." She looked at him. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me." "I'm aware." "It's good," she said. "Keep doing it." Something happened at the corner of his mouth, more than usual. Almost, this time, entirely a smile. "Okay," he said. But the Songji contact came Tuesday, not Wednesday. It came through her workplace, not the hotel, the dry cleaning shop, which told her they were thorough and had been thorough for longer than she'd known to be aware of it. A man came in with a coat that didn't need cleaning and stood at the counter and looked at her with the particular flat look of someone delivering a message they hadn't written and were not responsible for. He put a card on the counter, no name, a phone number. "Someone would like to speak with you," he said. She looked at the card, then at him. "About." "A mutual acquaintance." She picked the card up, held it. The shop was empty behind her, just the hiss of the steam press running on a timer in the back, the familiar warm chemical smell of the place where she'd spent 3 days a week for 2 years. "Tell whoever sent you," she said calmly, "that I received the message." The man looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the coat he'd brought in and walked out. She waited until the door closed. Then she took out her phone and texted Min-jae. They made contact. "The shop on Providence. Tell me what to do with the card." His response came in 40 seconds. "Don't call the number. I'm handling it. Are you all right?" She looked around the empty shop. The steam press. The hanging carousel of finished garments in their plastic. The counter she'd stood behind so many times that the edge of it had worn a faint mark into the front of her work apron. She texted back, "Yes, handle it." Then she went back to work. Tasab. She found out later, days later, from Do-hyun, because Do-hyun had apparently appointed himself the person responsible for ensuring she had information, the way Ji-won had appointed herself the person responsible for giving Zuri time, that the Songji situation had required 3 separate conversations, 2 of which involved parties she'd never heard of, and 1 of which had involved Ji-won herself, who had apparently decided that if she was going to be in Charlotte for a week, she might as well be useful. Do-hyun told her this over coffee at a place on Trade Street that he'd discovered and immediately decided was the best coffee in Charlotte, which he said about at least 1 place per week. "Your mother-in-law went to bat for you," he said, "is what I'm saying. She's not my—" Zuri stopped. "She advocated for a resolution." She told the Songji family that pursuing you would constitute a personal insult to the Kong organization at a level that would require a formal response. Do-hyun drank his coffee, which, in the language of the world we operate in, means touch her and see what happens, and you will not enjoy what happens. Zuri looked at her cup. Did she tell Min-jae she did that? He found out, Do-hyun said. He was... A pause. The pause of someone choosing a word carefully. He had feelings about it. Because she acted without telling him. Yes. The irony. Do-hyun pointed at her. That's exactly what she said when he brought it up. Zuri looked at him. She said irony. She said, and I'm quoting directly because I was in the room and I've been saving this. You spent 6 months making decisions about people's information because you thought you knew what they needed to know. I spent 40 years watching you learn that habit from your father. Don't come to me with complaints about it now. Do-hyun set down his cup. Then she left for the airport. Zuri sat with that for a moment. He was protecting her, she said. Ji-won, from the organization's response, by handling it before Min-jae knew to be angry about it. Yes. And he was doing the same thing to me. Yes. She looked out the window at Trade Street, the December afternoon, a man walking a dog that was clearly in charge of the walk. Same reflex, different generation. He knows, Do-hyun said. He's embarrassingly self-aware about it, actually. He just hasn't had a person who required him to act differently before. He looked at her. He's not going to be perfect at it. I know. He's going to want to manage things. I know. And you're going to have to tell him every time. I know, Do-hyun. She looked at him. I've been doing the hard version of every situation my whole life. I can do the hard version of this one. Do-hyun looked at her for a moment, then he raised his coffee cup. For what it's worth, he said, I told him you were the right one. Before the wedding. Before any of this. How could you know that? Because you looked at him like a person. He said it simply, like it was obvious. Not like an organization, not like a problem, not like a type or a category or an opportunity. He shrugged. You looked at him like someone you were still deciding about. Nobody does that. They've already decided before they walk in the room. She turned the cup in her hands. I'm still deciding, she said. In a way. That's good, Do-hyun said. That's what keeps it honest. 3 weeks later, Naya came to her apartment. She came on a Wednesday afternoon when Zuri was between shifts, which meant Nia had known her schedule, which meant she'd asked their mother, which meant whatever she was coming to say had been sitting long enough that she'd done the preparation. Nia was 24 and had their father's cheekbones and their mother's directness and a relationship with Zuri that had always been more complicated than either of them had been given language for. Zuri let her in, made coffee, sat across from her at the kitchen table with the same posture she'd brought to the restaurant with Ji-won, present, open, not managing anything in advance. Nia wrapped both hands around the mug and didn't drink from it, and looked at Zuri with an expression that Zuri recognized with a lurch, as the expression people had when they'd been carrying something for a long time and had finally decided to put it down regardless of the cost. There's something I need to tell you, Nia said. Okay. I've been trying to tell you for a year. I keep not doing it because I don't know how you'll... Nia stopped, pressed her lips together. His name was Derek. You knew him, a little. He worked at the pharmacy on Albemarle Road about 3 years ago. Zuri searched her memory, came up with a face, tall, quiet, someone she'd exchanged a few words with across the counter during a bad week when her father's prescription had come up short on insurance, and the man had spent an extra 10 minutes working through a discount option without her asking. I remember him, she said carefully. He wanted to ask you out. Nia didn't look away. He told me. He asked if I thought you'd be interested, because we'd talked a few times and he knew you were my sister. She paused. I told him you weren't. The kitchen was very quiet. I told him you weren't looking for anyone, Nia said, that you were focused on work and family, and that you'd specifically said you weren't interested in dating. Her voice was steady, but her hands on the mug were not. None of that was true. Zuri looked at her sister for a long time. Why? She said. Nia's jaw moved. Because I liked him, she said, and I knew if he met you, if he actually spent time with you, he'd... She stopped. I was 21 and jealous, and I told myself it wasn't a real opportunity, that you weren't interested anyway, that I was just... She put the mug down. I was jealous of you, and I lied, and he never asked you, and 6 months later he moved to Atlanta, and I never told anyone. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone's car alarm went off and then stopped. Zuri looked at her sister's face. The cheekbones. The expression underneath the cheekbones that was not her mother's at all. That was something younger and more breakable. The expression of a 24-year-old who had done a small, significant cruelty and had been living inside it and was now sitting across from the person it had been done to and waiting for the sentence. Is that everything? Zuri said. Yes. Zuri was quiet for a moment. She thought about Derek from the pharmacy and found she couldn't construct the shape of what might have happened. Not because it was too painful, but because there were too many variables, and she had long since learned the specific waste of energy involved in mourning alternate timelines. What she thought about, more than Derek, was the confirmation of something she had known for years without having evidence for it. That she had not been imagining the weight of her own invisibility. That some of it had been structural, and some of it had been circumstantial, and some of it had been the small active choices of people who knew her and had decided their need was more important than her chance. She looked at her sister. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't hurt, she said. Because it does, and you should know that it does. Nia's eyes were wet. I know. But I also... Zuri stopped, started again more carefully. I've spent a lot of time believing that I was the problem. That something about me made people consistently overlook me, and that the only solution was to work harder, or be quieter, or take up less space. She held Nia's gaze. You just told me that someone looked and then got redirected. That's not the same thing as nobody looking. Nia pressed a hand over her mouth for a moment. Then, I'm so sorry, Zuri. I know. Nia. Zuri reached across the table and put her hand over her sister's. Not absolution, not erasure, just contact. The basic, fundamental acknowledgement that the person across from you exists and that you can hold their weight for a moment without losing your own footing. We're going to have to work on this. Not today, not all at once, but we're going to have to figure out what we actually are to each other, because what we've been, isn't it? Nia nodded. She was crying quietly, the careful kind that tried not to take up too much room, which Zuri recognized with a complicated familiarity. I didn't know I was doing it, Nia said. Not consciously. I didn't think of myself as someone who... Nobody does, Zuri said. That's not an excuse. That's just the truth about how it works. They sat there together in the kitchen until the coffee got cold, and they talked in the halting way of people who are building a new language for a relationship that has always needed one. And it wasn't fixed and it wasn't clean, but it was, for the first time, honest. And Zuri found that honesty, even the difficult kind, even the kind that arrived 3 years late, was still worth more than the smooth surface of things that had never been examined. Min-jae announced the North American headquarters in January. It was framed in the press release as a strategic expansion, which it was legitimately. The organization had significant holdings in the region, and having a permanent physical base of operations was sound business across both the visible and invisible portions of what they ran. The business press covered it. A trade publication did a piece on what it signaled about Asian investment in the American Southeast. Nobody outside the relevant circles understood the real mathematics of it. Zuri read the press release on her phone during her lunch break at the dry cleaning shop and then put her phone in her pocket and went back to work. That evening, Min-jae came to her apartment for the first time. Not the hotel lobby, not a restaurant, her actual apartment, with its unpainted kitchen wall and its second-hand couch, and its window that looked out on the parking lot and Monica's balcony directly opposite, where Monica was very visibly not watching them through her sliding glass door. He looked around the apartment with the attention he brought to everything. She watched him look and didn't apologize for any of it. Monica is watching, she said. I know, he said. She's been watching since my car pulled in. She's protective. I'm aware. He turned from the window. I like that. She might say something to you eventually. I'm counting on it, he said. The people who say things are easier to trust than the people who don't. She thought about his mother, thought about how Jiwon's 40-minute conversation had been more honest than most years of other people's politeness. "Your mother," she said. "I want to understand her better." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because she built everything you're running and she's never going to stop having opinions about it. And I would rather understand her than perform a relationship with her." She met his eyes. "She told me the truth when it would have been easier not to. I owe her the same." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. "She liked you," he said. "She won't say it in those terms. She said you were substantive, which from her is—" "Substantive," Zuri repeated. "She reserves that word for things she respects. Not people? She doesn't distinguish." The corner of his mouth. "It's actually consistent." Zuri almost laughed. "Okay." He moved to the kitchen, looked at the wall, the unpainted wall, the pale yellow that had been waiting for the color she'd always meant to put there. "You've been meaning to repaint this for 3 years. What color?" She'd looked at swatches so many times she could see them without reaching for them. "Terracotta," she said. "Something warm." He nodded, like he was filing it, like it was going on a list of things he intended to make sure happened. She looked at him in her kitchen. This man who ran 14 countries' worth of invisible infrastructure, who hadn't slept well in 12 years, who'd put his hand on the back of her chair as though she were something worth steadying. "I need you to hear something," she said. He turned from the wall. "I've been the person who solves everything her whole life," she said. "The one who figures it out and carries it and doesn't complain about carrying it. And I'm not going to stop being that person because some of that is just who I am." She held his gaze. "But I'm not going to be that person for you while you manage the situation around me. If you want me in your life, I'm in it the same way I'm in everything, completely and with accurate information." She paused. "The minute you start deciding what I need to know, I become another thing you're managing, and I'm not going to be that." Min-jae looked at her. "I know," he said. "I need it to be a practice, not a promise," she said. "Because promises are easy. Practices are what you actually do." He was quiet for a moment, then, "When I want to withhold something, when the reflex is there, I'll tell you I want to. You have my word that I'll catch it and name it. And I'll tell you when I see it happening," she said. "Even if you don't catch it first. Even if I don't like it. Especially then." He looked at her with that specific quality of attention, the one that had registered her alphabetized paper files during a power outage, the one that had watched her handle a distressed guest from across a lobby at 2 a.m, the one that had, she understood now, been looking for her specifically before it found her. "Okay," he said. She breathed out. Something in her chest let go. Not everything, not all at once, but enough. The particular release of a weight that has been held so long the holding felt like the self. "There's something else," she said. He waited. "My parents don't know about the bills. What I've been covering." She looked at her hands briefly. "I'm going to tell them. Not today, but before this year is out. Because I understand now what it costs to protect people from information they deserve to have." She looked up. "I learned that from watching you." He held her gaze, and she saw in his face something that wasn't quite pain and wasn't quite pride, something that lived between the two. The expression of a person who has caused someone else to learn something the hard way, and knows it, and can't fix the learning, but can at least witness it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for being someone you had to learn that from." "Don't be sorry," she said. "Be different." Months passed the way months did when things were genuinely changing, not with the dramatic visible pace of crisis, but with the slow accumulation of ordinary days that were different from the ordinary days before them, in ways that only showed clearly when you looked back. Zuri told her parents. It went the way things went when you told people hard truths they'd been protected from. Badly at first, then slowly, then better than the badly, not fixed but breathing. Her mother cried. Her father went very quiet. Then her father asked how long, and she told him. And he was quiet for a long time, and then he said, "Baby, you should have told us." And she said, "I know. I'm telling you now." And they sat with it, and it was heavy and real and far more bearable than she'd spent years fearing it would be. Her mother, 3 weeks later, said something Zuri didn't expect. She said, "I didn't give you enough. I compared when I should have seen, and I'm—" Her mother stopped. Her mother was not a woman who apologized directly, not in Zuri's living memory. "I'm going to try to do better at seeing you." It wasn't everything. It was a beginning. Zuri was old enough now to understand that beginnings were the only things that led anywhere, and that waiting for everything was what kept you standing still. She and Naya found their way to something that was honest and sometimes uncomfortable, and far more solid than the smooth politeness of before. It required several more conversations that didn't go well, and one that went completely off the rails, and an eventual agreement that they would tell each other the truth and allow the other person to react to it, rather than managing the reaction in advance. They were slowly becoming sisters instead of performing it. Monica remained Monica, aggressively present, chronically right about things she had no business being chronically right about, the person Zuri called first when anything happened and last when the day was ending. Min-jae met her officially in February, and they spent 40 minutes in her apartment in a conversation that Zuri was not part of because Monica had requested a private conversation, and Min-jae had agreed without hesitation, which Zuri had noted. She never found out exactly what was said. Monica told her, "He's serious." Min-jae told her, "She asked me questions I needed to answer." That was sufficient. Do-hyun became, as Do-hyun tended to become in most situations, simply a presence. He knew the coffee on Trade Street and the dry cleaning shop, and Monica's name, and her parents' neighborhood, and approximately 600 other things about Zuri's life that she'd never formally told him, which meant he'd been paying attention in the specific way of someone who cared about a situation rather than someone gathering information about it. She found she didn't mind. The kitchen wall got repainted in March. Terracotta. She did it herself on a Sunday afternoon with the windows open despite the cold, and a playlist Monica had made for the occasion, and the particular satisfaction of covering something that had been waiting to be covered for 3 years. Min-jae came by while she was still painting. He looked at the wall. Then he picked up a brush without asking and did the corner she'd been struggling to reach, which required him to move the refrigerator slightly, which he did without comment. They painted in silence for a while. "You moved the headquarters," she said, not looking away from her section. "Yes. For business reasons. Among others." "Mostly for other reasons." He was quiet a moment. "Mostly for one other reason." She looked at the wall. The color was exactly what she'd seen in her head 3 years ago. Warm, deliberate, the color of something chosen rather than defaulted into. "Don't move anything else because of me," she said. "I'm not asking you to rearrange your world." "I know," he said. "I'm not rearranging it. He stopped. Started again. "I'm locating it where the important things are. That's different from rearranging." She considered that, found it accurate, which was the most she'd come to expect from him, and also, she'd discovered, more than she'd gotten from anyone else. "Okay," she said. They finished the wall. It took another hour, and they moved the furniture back and stood and looked at it in the late afternoon light coming through the window, and Zuri felt the particular satisfaction of something completed. Not perfect, the coverage was slightly uneven near the baseboard, but completed and real, and made by hand. Min-jae looked at the wall, then at her. "You're beautiful," he said. Quiet, like a fact rather than a declaration. She'd spent 28 years knowing what she looked like. She'd spent those years building the specific armor of a woman who knew exactly what she was working with and had made her peace with the working. She looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at things she'd decided to trust, completely, without managing the decision, without holding part of herself back in case she needed it for the retreat. "I know," she said. Not because she'd always known, because she was finally willing to believe the evidence. He crossed the few feet between them and kissed her in the terracotta kitchen, in the late afternoon light, with the smell of paint still in the air, and Monica's music coming faintly through the wall and her phone somewhere on the counter, with 3 unanswered texts and the bills paid, and her parents' number in her recent calls, and everything that was hers, still hers, intact, unchanged, except in the ways she had chosen to change it. She kissed him back. Outside, Charlotte ran its ordinary business. A bus at the corner, someone's radio. The specific ambient sound of a city that didn't know it was the backdrop for anything, which was true of most cities and most days and most moments that turned out to matter. Inside, a woman who had spent her entire life being managed and overlooked and measured against standards she hadn't set held onto something she'd chosen with her eyes open and her hands full and her feet on ground she'd always known the feel of. Not a fairy tale, not a rescue. Something that required more than either of those things and was, because of that, worth more than either of them. She had walked into a rainy night lobby and solved 3 problems simultaneously and not waited to be thanked for it. She had walked into a room full of people who spoke in declarations and looked directly back at them. She had sat across from a woman who had spent 40 years deciding who belonged and had not performed smallness. She had told the truth when the truth was difficult and heard it when it was harder to hear. She had done what she always did, carried what needed carrying, solved what needed solving, stood where she needed to stand. The difference now was that she had not done any of it alone. And when Min Jae pulled back and looked at her face, that careful, complete attention, the same one that had registered her paper files in a power outage, that had watched her across a lobby in the small hours, that had been looking for something specific before it found her. She looked back, without looking away, without waiting for the next thing to carry, just present, in the terracotta kitchen, in the life that was hers. It was enough. It was, she understood now, exactly enough.